Now I'm getting authentic sounds within the style and the genre I'm trying to create, but I'm still in the same plugin. I don't have to buy another one. I don't have to buy like, oh shit, I have to go buy two more that are slightly more pop because now I'm starting to build this out. But I can actually go within Arcade to have the effects, to have on top of that, like the ability to still create those sounds, and those samples I think are fantastic. Hey, it's Mike Myers from the Songwriting for Guitar podcast. Before we jump into this episode, if you're a songwriter, guitarist, and you're looking to advance your skills, gain confidence, and monetize your craft, be sure to check out songwritingforguitar.com for all our free resources. So let's jump into this week's episode. We're here to talk about my love for Arcade because there's so many when you get into licensing, and if you start home recording and you start recording yourself, you do the deep dive of what plugin should I get? What shouldn't I get? And you go down that YouTube rabbit hole of seeing all these different tutorials and you're like, I should get this. I will say this with certainty. The number one plugin you probably should have, if you don't own anything right now, is Arcade. Arcade is made by Output. And this came out around 2019, and I first signed up for it because I was curious. And I've never canceled my subscription, purely for a couple of reasons. I deal in a couple different genres that I like to create. So I find that there's versatility within Arcade. And the best way to describe Arcade is, if you've ever seen those Russian dolls, like Matryoshka dolls, that are like a doll within 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 a doll, that's essentially Arcade. It's a plugin within a plugin within a plugin within a plugin within a plugin, where there's so many different facets with it. It's almost like it's a separate DAW on its own, full of different sample sounds, different genres that you can be jumping to. And this year they added a new feature where you can also treat it as purely as just a straight up like patch, where you can start playing within your MIDI keyboard. It's no longer just samples, but you can actually be creating sounds within it. And, you can do full-on pad sounds, which is fantastic. And what I love about it too, it is royalty free. And I think since we've started this membership, anytime that I've built something, I guarantee at some point I pulled out Arcade in some respect. In some area, I was using Arcade, regardless if it was indie pop, regardless if it was cinematic, regardless if it was folk, regardless if it was singer-songwriter. I was pulling up Arcade because I like to think of my song and maybe the chord structure and, everything involved as tile. Arcade is like the grout that like puts it and fills it all together where it feels finished. There's something about it where I'm like, oh, there we go. It's kind of filling in some of the gaps and the holes and transitions. And we're going to dive in and take a look at some of the facets that you can use Arcade for. And I'm going to show you two examples, full song, and actually an example that I used this weekend, or that I leaned heavily into Arcade because I had to build out a huge amount of underscore. And I just basically leaned into finding some great sounds within Arcade to help fill in a lot of those textures. So Arcade kind of looks like this. If you open it up, this is what you get, which at first, if you're new to Arcade, this is confusing as hell. And you're like, what the hell? Basically what you click is lines. And this is where you have all your different libraries. Think of it this way. This is where you're going to be pulling all your different sounds. Now, if you are someone who deals in a lot of, let's say, singer-songwriter, a little ethereal, and you love kind of like those airy sounds. You're not looking for necessarily full-on loops that are playing a very specific sample, but you're looking for those pads that kind of give that ambience, that stability. There's several different packs that I love going to, and each one, Aurora right here, or Aura, I guess, Aura, is one of my favorite. Now, with Arcade now, there's three amazing different ways that we can navigate. Now, first is just the sampler, meaning if I go into this right now and click Ancient History, if I click from C all the way down here to this high C, and I'm just using my MIDI to trigger it, all these little pads, all these different like sample sounds. And what I love is right here, I can control the key. This is the number one thing that I was drawn to with Arcade. unlike things that, for instance, if we were to do the splice route and grab samples, you kind of have to search by key and you hope you figure out something. But to be able to switch keys very easily is, to me, one of the best benefits. And it's adjusting to my tempo. Usually what you're going to find sometimes with like things within splice, it's not going to adjust to the tempo. You're going to find really awkward keys, but also too, a lot of splice is not royalty free, not all of it. So if you are using this for sync and they ask, did you use samples? Yes. A lot of them do not like splice at this point. They just kind of stay away from it. But arcade, on the other hand, from output, they're fine with, because this is all 100% royalty free. So that means it is cleared. It is okay for use. And that to me is already another highly that's like another point that I love about arcade. But if we were to start right now, just this sound. And even just on the board, I can start manipulating it a little bit. And what I love about, especially in this particular pack, is it's more of a drone, but that drone evolves. It's not staying necessarily all the way through, but it's slowly. Now, you can still do things within, I still do things within Logic. If I feel it's too high, I'll take a high pass filter and now I'll change it to take some of the brightness out, but I still love some of those characteristics. And I think that's what's great about arcade. This pack in particular is always my go-to when I'm looking for anything ambient that's like a swell in, like where I just have maybe an acoustic guitar and vocal, acoustic and piano, or piano and vocal. The idea of like this is like essentially kind of like a background, or is kind of that flooring underneath my chord structure is great, because if I took that away, it's super noticeable. It's almost like the guitar and vocal, it's a little empty, or it feels slightly like a demo. It doesn't feel finished. But as soon as I add something that's more textured, I love that. Now, let's say I love getting into cinematic. Cinematic's kind of like my go-to that I love doing. They've done a pack with actually Spitfire, which is really good. And that's called Overture. And that's where it gets into stabby synth line or string lines. One that I love is called In a World. And that's what I kind of enjoy about these packs. They have very specific titles that are clearly about like different like genres. So we're getting into that's like a perfect sub hit. And again, I can, yeah, there we go. So let's say you have a piano and you have on top of that a very airy vocal. And to start things out, it goes, then the piano starts playing. The vocal then goes over top of it. I think is much more engaging and draws me in more than necessarily if you just started with piano vocal. So this idea of texture, layers, all with an arcade is pretty much one of the, I think, brings more authenticity to tracks. And especially if you're starting to be a little versatile in what you're creating. If you're doing some singer-songwriter stuff, but you want to do some dark cinematic stuff. If you want to do some indie rock things, this gives you the capability to have some sounds at your disposal that you don't have to go and buy a million different plugins. But you can actually start with something like this, giving you that authenticity. You can adjust it based on, like, for instance, here, your key like this. See, I'm just going to go switch keys and you're going to hear that slight adjustment. Ooh. I love that. Now I'd be curious, what does that sound like subbed in? Oh yeah, I love that. Now, one of the more advanced features with Arcade that I like is if I click this little button where there's 3, it's going to go edit. And I actually get to see what the sample's like. Now, a lot of these ones, especially in this particular expansive, it's called expansive hit. So these are just stabs. Have really long endings. So the tail just keeps on going. But let's say I want something that is. And then I want it again. I can take this little thing right here and drag it to where the sample is then going to loop right here. So no longer is it going to be this long, extensive, drawn out. But right here, I can go. And now it's looping around more and more and more. And to me, that's another thing. I actually have control of manipulating that sample. So I could take it down all the way to, yeah, I've now moved my BPM all the way down to, where am I at? 99. I could keep on going. I even have the ability to maybe even cut the speed down. I love that. Just the ability to just go in and edit each one of these really quickly. Now, this is within something that's like dark. Let's go into something that's going to be more indie pop. There are 2 samples, in my opinion, or 2 libraries within Arcade that I tend to go for a lot. Poolside is my always #1 go-to for interesting percussion. Because usually I'm looking for some sort of interesting sub kick, some sort of like snare that is going to have an interesting pattern, maybe some sort of snaps, light hand claps. And so right here, cool, kind of like a dry kick. Let's see what the snare is going to be. I like that. Let's move that up to maybe, I don't know, let's do like a mid tempo. Let's say we're at like 85. Now, immediately too, I love the ability to take Arcade and use it within as I'm building out a song or an idea. Essentially like a song starter. If I go like, you know what? How about we need something, let's say I have someone in the studio and we're writing and we want to have something rhythmic. We know this is going to be a little upbeat. I would take something like this right now and then just go. I'm just going to loop that. And immediately I would just take it, sync that up. And let's just loop it right there. And then that way I'm freed up to start playing. I can like grab my guitar and we can start riffing on maybe a verse idea or chorus idea. Okay, so let's dive. We're getting into percussion, but let's get into like maybe a hook, a line, or something that you could have on the intro of something. Let's grab within Poolside. Let's go with, yeah, AM vibe. And let's say we're doing something in the key of, I don't know, A major. I like that. But one thing I want to do is, cool, let's go back to that one really quick. I need to create a different track. There we go. And so let's say, let's do. That's cool. Ooh. Cool. I like that. But what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to, we're actually just going to loop this. Let's see. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to. Ooh, I like that. Okay, so let's take that one and just record that. Now let's say we're kind of vibing on that and we kind of like that line. But again, there's certain parts we don't want. And let's say I just want it to go back to that beginning part right here. Like I don't want this extra thing at the end. Yeah, there we go. Let's take that. Yeah, I like that. Because maybe that's not the center point of the chords or like, you know, the full song, but maybe that's my intro. So let's say this is going to be where the verse starts. And so maybe I'll do something. So how you add a track is you treat it like a MIDI instrument. So if I were to go up here to my software instrument, I would load AU instruments, and all the way down, I'm going to see our output, arcade, and I would load it. And so it's essentially like any plugin you would buy that way. And that's how I'm kind of treating it right now. So let's say this is my intro, going to be my intro to a song. And let's say I want kind of like a cool little funky little swell. So let's say right here. Let's do it that way. And let's see what that sounds like. Yeah, okay. So let's go back here. Let's do it again. Let's try that right about here. Boom. And that's where it starts. The whole point that I'm using for arcade here, I'm not going to take that loop and then loop it throughout the song as my chord progression, but I'm choosing to make this just like a hook. This is meant to just grab me for that moment before the vocal comes in, just those very few seconds. How do you set the DAW to record? So all I do is I hit record as I would. I'm treating this like I would, for instance, if I went into Logic and I was going to use just a regular, I don't know, let's say I just went with a Hammond organ. I'm using my MIDI my MIDI keyboard to activate all those notes underneath Songwriter. And how do they stay in sync? Arcade is just reading what your tempo is right here. And so that's how it's adjusting its sample speed. Now, once I get it in line, I will bounce it in place. For instance, I'll just call this intro loop. And then I'll bounce it in place and it's all good. And now I've committed to audio, but as always, I save the MIDI track if I ever need to manipulate it, change it. House pop sounds. So Poolside surprisingly has some cool little funky lines. Right down here, there's two. After Hours is one of my favorites. This is actually one of the first pop packs that Arcade had. And lots of good. Let's lots of cool little sample lines. And the other one I love too. So After Hours has a ton. The other one I would go after would be In a World, Where Are You? This is actually a new pack they just unrolled. I want to say a few months. Pop Underground. Love Pop Underground. And again, same deal. You can go back right here, change keys. Now, one of the newer features is play an instrument. And so what this is, unlike the other ones that had various samples all throughout from like C2 all the way to like C4, this is where you can actually start to choose certain sample sounds and use them, and you can actually play lines. Like you could take the full-on instrument. So as you can see underneath, there's C0, C1, C2. So I can start to play full-on chords. So what I love about this half is now I'm getting authentic sounds within the style and the genre I'm trying to create, but I'm still in the same plugin. I don't have to buy another one. I don't have to buy like, oh shit, I have to go buy two more that are slightly more pop, because now I'm starting to build this out, but I can actually go within Arcade, start to use some of this. And again, this has been a fairly new addition to Arcade, but it's one that I really love using. And I found myself actually going in and building things this way because it's a little bit easier. Again, we've got an arpeggiator here too. So I could like go in and decide, hey, what's the preset that I want? What's the pattern that I want? I can actually choose all of this, which are things that you would do in a normal, if you had something like Serum, which is again, like built out to like have lots of different sample sounds. You do the same thing within Serum, but to me, to have the effects, to have on top of that, like the ability to still create those sounds and those samples, I think are fantastic. And to have a wide variety. Now, if you're someone that's like, Mike, I don't really do pop. I don't do cinematic. I do, let's say you do country pop. Awesome. Guess what? Scroll all the way down to, I use this a lot, Nashville. This is where there's actually some really decent, I've used this when I used to build out a lot of country pop. I use this for slides, banjo, and mandolin. Such killer sounds on here. Where is it? I think it's called Mando Bomb. Floating banjo is like a killer. Even if we are doing something, I don't know, like dark, kind of like Walking Dead style, like underscore that was like a little like, I guess, like, you know, kind of in the swamp rock style. Go-to packs for 808s, I would go, Peter, I would go into, I would still go into Poolside, and I would still probably then lean towards Pop Underground. Those are going to be the two that I would do. And then also too, I would still throw in After Hours. Those are the three that have been, to me, the most consistent in anything indie pop, full-on pop, funky, like slightly disco pop. I think especially for you, there's a cool drum pack that's just called Drum Breaks, that really good, like if you're trying to highlight like clean, kind of like Gretsch style, like Questlove kit style drums, that has been really good and consistent, which I love. Kind of that tight snare, because you're doing like that Dua Lipa style, and it's like, and it's not like a super compressed drum, it's like a drum that you're almost like right next to. But if you're doing things like Americana, you're doing things like country, if you are doing building out things like that is a hybrid kind of like swamp rock, which I did for a while and I kind of pulled from here, this is great. Clearly this is major. Let's go minor. Let's go like E minor. Like what's great about these samples too, they evolve a little bit, but they're not front in center. They're not going crazy. They're not going all over the place where it's going to be distracting. So if I've got a busy chorus, but I'm still looking for the twang, it's going to sit in that pocket and it's going to give me what I want. These are compatible with literally any DAW. So if you've got, I think you got Studio One, totally fine. If you've got Logic, if you've got Pro Tools, if you've got FL Studios, if you've got Reaper, if you've got Ableton, this is compatible with any DAW. And that's what I think is super versatile about this. But I think also too, if this is anyone where you are building out things where you need more authentic sounds and you need that next level thing, kind of that texture level that solidifies your genre and your style, and you're not getting it right now and it feels empty, this is where I use Arcade to fill in a lot of those gaps. And so Shark Week is happening, and they were requesting something for Alien Shark. And I was like, what the hell is Alien Shark 2? I don't know what that is. Apparently it's like sharks that are like in the super depths. So it's like, you don't see it. Then they were asking for something that was, they called it orchestral synth. And so what they were looking for were things that had these ambient layers. They had a playlist and I was going through, and then I found one that had kind of like a mono synth that was kind of like fuzzy, but there was lots of just textured layers that were evolving, because underscore is a little bit different. Underscore is where, you know, when we're going into the realm, and don't worry if you're someone, I don't do underscore, I do full songs. I'm going to show an example with full songs. But if you're someone that's interested in the idea of underscore, this is where you got to do textured layers. This is not meant to be front and center because there's dialogue, there's, you know, there's action happening. And so this one was super interesting to me because I was layering lots of different, a ton of different sort of textured sounds. So the first arcade noise that I went with, or I guess kind of, as you can see, a lot of this I go like notes, texture 4, texture 2. This was one of them. And here's what it sounded like. Really, it feels like it's just wind. It feels like it's just air, essentially, just kind of like passing through. And eventually I was like, cool, let's find another texture with an arcade that kind of matches the feel. Now, since I was looking for something specific and I had at least an idea and a visual that they were going to be underwater, it's going to be dark. There's going to be like, you know, they have one of those super depth, like robot cameras that kind of go around with lights. you're not going to necessarily see things. So it needs to feel eerie. So already it feels eerie to me. Okay. I'm moving in the right place. Then I had another texture. I was like, cool, let's find something else too. And again, I'm still thinking highs, mids, lows. It's just one noise. This is kind of. And I found these really cool subby drums with an arcade too. That was just a simple tom sound pattern, kind of like a heartbeat. Like to me, since I had to bounce, when I create things like this underscore, I'm bouncing different versions of this track. I was really able to do like, cool, here's one texture. Here's another one. Here's another one. I could give them multiple versions before I added any guitar. And the guitar honestly wasn't the center point. This was a little kind of like swelling. And the only analog synth that I have is one Moog off to the side. And, it was kind of just doing a little bit of this, but mixed with the textures now. Cool. This is Anya. Now, none of this were like really specific melodic lines, but this was texture. But what was interesting to me within Arcade, all of these textures evolved a little bit, that when they overlap too, because this is a question people go, well, if this is for sync, how do I know somebody's not using that sample too? Nobody's going to use the exact sample mixed with another sample that you are. Your project is going to be a little bit different. So everyone's going to use it in their own way. I like to think the way I've combined different textures, no one's using this. No one sat and used this exact texture at this exact speed with this exact effect. I was able to carry with, or basically convey what I needed. And I see there's a lot of questions about the proverbial rabbit hole I'll get into, because I know with this, it can be like, how do I know I'm not going to waste hours searching for those perfect sounds? Here's one that was a full-on track that I just finished up with an awesome artist. Her name's Jasmine. And my friend Judy Stakey hooked us up. She lives in Nashville, and we've been doing some like slightly singer-songwriter pop stuff, but this was kind of like a dark pop style song, and we decided to call it Stranger. And so I want to play for you kind of the arcade samples that we used. The first thing that we did use was arcade drums. I really loved the kick with an arcade. Again, really good sub kick. Like it's just, again, it feels like a heartbeat. And you see, I kept that same pattern. Maybe I cut here and there in moments where I didn't want it. But then the hi-hat too, I loved. So I believe that pack that I got, that was in Poolside. Poolside tends to be my go-to for a lot. Poolside has been my go-to a ton for sub bass, really cool little trap hi-hats, but also the snare sound that I liked that has kind of like this. And then I went into, I think I showed you the Spitfire Overture kind of pack within Arcade. There was a really cool sample cello, or was it? No, it was the viola that I really loved. And so combined with everything, so when we get to that chorus, to me,
created by the stranger in the clothes I've seen before, living stranger taking over who you were. Where did you go?
Oh, chill vibes. I forgot right up here. I talk about ambience. The beginning was actually just this. And so we had her vocal in there.
What I wanna hear, but why do you think I won't catch on? Is there more to who you are?
And it wasn't bad, but we were like, it's definitely a little empty. And so as soon as I threw in this kind of like pad behind chill vibe,
you're telling me what I wanna hear.
me, just this. Now that was in the Aura pack. It's just this evolving little texture that's just behind. It's not front and center because it's not meant to be front and center. But when you have those gaps in between a vocal line where it stops, or maybe a pause within a piano, sometimes we feel the need to keep on playing because there's this silence, but when we have just nothing, and we've just got this little texture,
A victim to the stranger in the clothes I've seen before, living.
and again, like the track to me was not awful. It was good, but what happened with Arcade, it just then started to fill in some of those gaps. There was a texture underneath. Like, I don't think if I had used, I don't know, just like a normal drum kit or something from Logic, that I would have liked the drum pattern. I actually enjoyed too the idea that we were able to go through very quickly in Poolside, pick a drum pattern, be like, that's it, committed, and we were able to start creating and start writing. And that to me is a little bit of the beauty of using something like Arcade. When I first got Arcade, I was confused as hell. Like there were so many different things. I was doing a lot of testing. So I would pick a day to literally do that, test, not create, because that's a lot of pressure on yourself to be like, let me find the perfect sound right now and be in the flow of creating. You need to pick a day where you're actually deep diving on sounds. And so anything that I get new, I take some time to just play with it. Because what do you do when you're a kid and you get a new toy? What do? You don't think about like, how can I practically, you just play with it. You figure it out. You mess around with it. So we have to allow ourselves that time to play around with the thing. Like towering immensely. It's probably kick-ass. I don't know what it is, but I bet it's going to sound really cool. So let's see what it is. So I'm going to click down here and then, whoop. Yeah, that's really lower. Ooh. Do not take the sample purely at face value. This is where you have to look at it like, are there things that I could do to maybe I don't like some of the highs right now. It's a little too nice. So let me take a single band EQ and I'm going to take some of the highs out. Ooh. Okay. And I like that. This is where you have to use a little bit of like, okay, what are the elements that you like? In this case, we kind of like some of the powerful kind of feel of this. What I didn't like, I don't know, if I take it off now, it feels a little flat. It feels a little too bright for me. It's almost like a little too fancy orchestral. I want some, but I don't want 100%. Maybe it's, you've got a sub bass going, you've got like soft vocals. And if I've got this thing pulsing, it's almost hitting at the same frequency as your vocals. And I'm like, I don't want that. But as soon as I take that out, feels a little bit darker, feels a little bit waterier. And I like that. So my first thought is you do have to spend time to really diving in and messing around, but you have to dedicate time to that. If you're saying, I'm going to figure out the perfect sound in the creation mode while you're trying to think of a specific part, you will constantly just be like racking your brain and frustrated. And then any energy that you had to actually create and record, you're like, I'll do it later. You just stop because you've killed the momentum. So you have to carve out that time to play around. And so that's why it's like, don't deep dive on every sound, but deep dive specifically on what you're trying to create right now. So if it's like, I'm trying to create and search for the best sub kick I can find, the best like sub bass that I can find, then you're not going to get distracted like, oh, well, there's a cool snare clap. That's not what you're looking for. You move on to the next one until you find it. But once you do, you're like, awesome, saved, and you remember that, then you can move on to the next thing. That's the best suggestion I would say right there. Excellent. So that was a deep dive on Arcade. Hey, it's Mike from Songwriting for Guitar. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And hey, don't leave. We got other cool videos you should check out too. Like some of these right here. Oh, that one right there. That's really good. You should click that. Right there. Just click it.